There's not one Armenian that doesn't have a genocide story. And now in Armenia, there's not one Armenian that hasn't lost a husband, a son, a brother. It feels extremely hopeless. There are 360 million Christians who are persecuted every year. You think of crucifixions, you think of the early Roman Empire, you think of Jesus, but these are women who were actually crucified.
Hey guys, welcome to the Lila Rose podcast. We've had her on the podcast before. She is my dear friend, Simone Rizkallah. I'll introduce her in a moment. We're going to hear from her on a topic that I think is really important, and it's a news pop topic. It's a thing that's in the news, or it should be in the news. It's happening right now, and that's Christian persecution, particularly of Armenians. So we're going to get into it, what's going on in the world, what our response can be, whether you're a Christian or not, or how we can engage. But first of all, very excited to welcome Simone. Simone is a dear friend of mine that I've known for going on, I think, 15 years now. It's been a while. And she is the director of program at Endow, an amazing women's ministry. She's also a special advisor to the president for the Philos Project. She is a theologian and a speaker and a writer, and someone that I love very much. Simone, thanks for coming back on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Lila. So grateful.
The last time we did this, we talked about personality types.
We did, because you know I'm obsessed with personality types.
It was very fun.
Now I'm obsessed with working genius.
Yes. Our friend Pat Lencioni's new tool to help you understand your strengths and weaknesses, the working genius from Table Group. So, Simone, you have been on a campaign lately to draw awareness to what is happening to Christian families in this little pocket of Armenia where they're being starved to death and no one's talking about it. Someone just died last week. Children are malnourished. Yep. I want to get into all of that. But first, you are Armenian.
Yes.
you are Armenian. You are a Christian.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about, I can see immediately why this is something you're passionate about, but tell us a little bit about your background in learning about your heritage.
Yeah.
And I want to understand the background of Armenia because it's really important, I think, not just for Christians, but geopolitically.
Yep.
This little country in the middle of the Middle East, surrounded by countries that don't share its values.
Right.
Give us the lay of the land on Armenia.
Yes. Well, I'm Armenian Egyptian. So most Armenians are actually in the diaspora because of the Armenian genocide. So there are more Armenians living outside of Armenia than actually in Armenia proper. In my family's case, we decided to go to Egypt. So that's why we're Armenian Egyptian. And
why Egypt?
Why? I think Egypt at that time, there was a lot of opportunity. Especially in my great-grandparents, my grandparents, my parents' day, there was a lot of economic opportunity. It was very cosmopolitan. There were Greeks, Armenians, Jews, Italians. My grandma learned Italian. She had an Italian neighbor. So it
like
was
me and you.
like, yes, that's kind of why I brought it up. So it was a place of opportunity, a place where Armenians could prosper. My great-grandfather was told, hey, things are going to get pretty bloody here for Armenians. You should probably get out. So he did. And I'm glad he did. And that's a success story of mercy for me and my family. But of course, we have stories of people in our family that we lost to the genocide. No time to get into that, but that's why.
No, I want to get into that because I think it's so important people understand the history here because there's a lot of it.
Yes.
So just to walk it back to your story with Egypt, your family chose Egypt. They were leaving Armenia to go to Egypt. Were they being persecuted in Armenia when they left to Egypt, or were they going more for economic opportunity?
No, it was before the genocide. There was talk that things were going to get tough for Armenians, that there was going to be bloodshed. That rumor, my great-grandfather on my maternal side took seriously.
What year was this? Or around what time?
Well, it had to be before the 1915, right? So my grandmother
like early 20th century.
My grandmother was born in 1912 in Alexandria, Egypt. So it had to have been before then. Now, there was a little genocide, not little genocide, there's such a thing as a little genocide, but there were persecutions and genocide against the Armenians in the 1890s, the Hamidian Massacres that occurred. That's a whole other incredible story.
What are those? What are the So you're saying in the 1890s, there were Armenian Christians who were killed in the
Hamidian Massacres.
Massacres. What was that?
The really interesting thing about that is the Sultan's name, Hamidian, after him. But the really interesting thing about that is that, and this is kind of neat for Americans to know, is that American Congregationalists, pastors, went to go evangelize in that area. They didn't have much success with evangelizing Muslims, so they actually evangelized Armenians who are already Christians. But that's why we have Armenians who are evangelicals and Presbyterians, and they help. There's a lot of Armenians who are alive today, and in Fresno, California, because
I used to know some.
Why are Armenians in Fresno? Because these American Congregationalist missionaries that went to Armenia ended up getting them to come to California and saving their life. So a lot of the Armenians from a region in now considered Turkey, Harput, the Harput Armenians, were saved because of these American missionaries, which is really interesting.
So going back to the 1890 massacre, who is hurting who and why?
The Turks, the Ottomans, and then later in World War I.
And because they're Muslim and they were persecuting Christians, or was it also because of the ethnicities being different?
So when you mention you're an Armenian and you're a Christian, to be an Armenian is to be a Christian. Mm-hmm. We are the first nation to declare Christianity its state religion in 301 AD. That belongs to the legacy of the Armenian people, that we were the first to declare Christianity our official state religion, because St. Gregory the Illuminator healed and evangelized the king.
Wow.
Yes. So he got baptized. He took St. Gregory out of solitary confinement, and he was healed and he was converted, and then so were the Armenians.
Our sponsor today is 7 Weeks Coffee. 7 Weeks Coffee is my favorite coffee brand. It's 7weekscoffee.com. You get your organic gourmet coffee. But best part of all is that it's not just delicious coffee, but this coffee supports the pro-life movement. It's called 7 Weeks, as you heard before in the podcast, because that's when the heartbeat can be detected and the baby is about the size of a coffee bean. 7 Weeks Coffee gives 10% of all of its revenue to pro-life resource pregnancy centers. Check out 7weekscoffee.com and use the code Lila at checkout for 10% off your order. 7weekscoffee.com. Public Square is our next sponsor. They are the marketplace now for companies that share your values. It is basically the conservative, values-aligned Yelp. This is a directory that is a free download app. You can download this app for free, of over 50,000 companies that are pro-life, pro-family, pro-freedom. Check it out. You're going to see some of your favorite brands on there, like Every Life Diapers or 7 Weeks Coffee, but check out Public Square. Click on the link in the description to download the Public Square app today for free. So, have there been, for those, let's say, almost 2,000 years, like leading up to the massacre you mentioned in the 1890s,
and then World War I,
and then I want to get to that. Have there been, because they've had this Christian identity in the middle of what would become a very Islamic region?
Yeah.
How much of it has been, attacks because of the ethnic differences versus when did it really become attacks because of the religious differences? Because Islam didn't really enter the world until the 5th or 6th century, right?
Yes. 7th or 8th century is Arab invasions. So it's complicated, because to be an Armenian is to be a Christian. So there is a hatred of the Armenian people. There's also a hatred of the faith and the resilience of Armenians who will not convert, to Islam. So it's all, now there are other reasons. Armenians have done really well, very resourceful people, very successful. So there's also jealousy there. There's also geopolitical paranoia involved in the First World War that also made Armenians a easy scapegoat in a certain sense, because of, well, who are the Armenians going to align with? Are they going to align with the Ottomans, with the Turks, or are they going to align with the Russians, or like what? There's complicated questions like that at play. So we don't want to say it's just because of ethnic or religious ideological differences. There's other factors at play, as there always are with these problems of war. But certainly it's a big part of what's going on, and probably the root part.
So when your family left Armenia for Egypt, you said it was right before World War I and right before the 1915 genocide.
Yeah.
What happened? What did they save ultimately you from? Because if they had been caught up in that and had been killed, I wouldn't know you. It would just be, unbearably horrible. Yeah. But what happened?
Yeah, 1.2 million Armenians were massacred. 1.2 million. The word genocide, we know that word. That word was coined by a Polish jurist who coined that word in large part because of what happened to the Armenians when Hitler was planning his Jewish Holocaust. A Nazi official asked him, "How are you going to get away with this Jewish Holocaust?" And Hitler responded, "Well, who today even remembers the Armenians?"
Wow.
So
who was eradicating 1.2 million Armenians, and how was that done?
It was done in a variety of ways. Dan Burke mentioned this when I was talking to him on Divine Intimacy Radio, that he's Jewish, he's of Jewish background, and when he started researching the genocide, he was horrified to discover the crucifixions of Armenian women. So crucifixions, starvation, death marches, shootings, all the various ways.
And who was the aggressor?
The Turks.
It was the Turks. Okay.
It was the Turks.
So, and the Turks were in World War I. What was give us the kind of, for people listening who don't know exactly the Armenia story, how did that play out in World War I?
Well, what do you mean, how did that play out?
Was this part of World War I or in the lead up to World War I?
It was during World War I.
So 1.2 million people killed.
Yeah.
And, obviously the Holocaust is absolutely horrific, the Jewish Holocaust, and the amount of millions of Jews killed. And there's a Holocaust Remembrance Museum in D.C., and it's unfathomable to think of all the evils committed. There was a genocide before that I don't know isn't a common language today that we talk about. I think your average person doesn't know about the Armenian genocide.
Right. They don't.
And these were men, women, and children killed during this by the Ottoman Turks in a variety of ways.
And there was also Greeks and Kurds and Assyrians and others who were killed. So the number we throw out as 1.5, but I think, and people dispute how many were Armenians, how many were Greeks, but we say 1.2 Armenians, 1.5 total.
And you mentioned crucifixions. What happened with that?
There are pictures, horrific pictures of women who were crucified. You can, I don't want to say Google this, don't Google it, but I remember growing up as a child looking at all of these Armenian genocide books and stories and seeing pictures of women literally. You think of crucifixions, you think of the early Roman Empire, you think of Jesus, but these are women who were actually crucified.
For their faith? Do you think that's part of it? Or they were just an especially torturous way? They wanted to just inflict extra pain?
Yeah, I think, again, I don't know the details of the story of why these women, and I don't have an exact number on it, 9 to 15 women, but it's so horrific I don't want to say it's one thing to be shot, but it's one thing to be shot. It's another thing to be crucified.
It's unbearably horrific.
Yeah.
So Armenia undergoes this incredible persecution. 1.2 million people are wiped out. What happens next? Are there any Armenians left?
So again, many in the diaspora, Americans, and were amazing at. Historian Howard Sasher said that, and I quote, Americans kept an entire nation quite literally alive. Maybe that's, that's incredible thing for Americans to be really proud of.
How did they do that?
They rallied, they raised awareness, they sent money. There's a really great book by Peter Balakian called The Burning Tigris, where he documents American involvement in keeping Armenia and Armenians alive and going. J.D. Rockefeller convinced Clara Barton to take the Red Cross International, and the first time she did was for the Armenians, for Armenia. So there was a time, actually, in American history in the early part of the last century where Americans knew about Armenia and knew what was happening and were rallying for them, raising money for them, sending relief, aid, help.
So Christian persecution, my understanding of it is that today it has increased even in just the last couple decades. What's the information? What are the statistics on that people should know?
So the latest statistics are that there are 360 million Christians who are persecuted every year. And the number has now reached up to 76 countries as of 2023 that persecute Christians.
And what does it mean to, like, does the United States, I know some Christians here are like, I'm persecuted because I'm being told I have to pay taxes to the government who does abortions, right?
Yeah.
And I don't personally buy that because, I think it's completely horrific that the government does that, but I think we have incredible protections in the United States, religious freedom protections.
Yes.
And yes, the missing protections in the United States are the fact that children are being killed by abortion and they don't have any protections. It's not a religious issue, it's just they're human beings that are too young.
Yeah.
So what is that? Does that statistic? How does it? What is the definition there for a country that persecutes a Christian?
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't put the United States. I agree with you on that list. We're talking about countries that range from top number one violator, North Korea, right? Which is extreme persecution, extreme religious persecution. You can't even think your own thoughts in North Korea. To Somalia, Libya, Egypt, Yemen, these kind of countries where and I really like the Voice of the Martyrs. I like For the Martyrs, Open Doors. They have really great maps and statistics on all this. And something I really like about the Open Doors persecution map, which I used to use when I taught high school. I'd have my students just look at the world map and look at all the countries where Christians are persecuted. They're the number one people persecuted in the world. And something that Open Doors does is they have different categories, 3 different categories, from like very hostile persecution to like second-class citizenry, discrimination. So you can take a look at that map and see, okay, which country and what is the nature of that persecution,
Are Christians the most persecuted religious group in the world?
They absolutely are. And that's little known as well. 1 in 7 Christians, 1 in 7 are considered persecuted.
Most people, I think, wouldn't think that. And I think that's because in the West, it seems like Christianity is doing so well in terms of its freedoms anyways. Maybe it's like struggling because culturally, the culture is getting so hedonistic and all of these things, which go against the Christian faith. And there's this confusion of what does it even mean to be Christian? How do you be a Christian? But it's hard to think that here we are in the West, we're in California right now. And there's a lot of darkness here culturally. Yeah. But we can go any day we want to pray. We can speak what we want, speak our minds. And we have protection. Like, we're not worrying about being persecuted for it in terms of the government coming after us, typically. But that there are other Christians right now at this time who are facing even death for their belief. Yeah. What's some of the worst cases of it right now?
Well, we hear a lot of Nigeria's on the top 10. I feel like we're always hearing something about Boko Haram, kidnapping Christian girls. My mom has been kind of keeping me up to date on what's happening in Egypt again. Like, there's been kidnapping of Coptic girls. What happened in Pakistan and India in the last few weeks, I can't remember the details, but church attacks, church bombings,
Yeah, I think it's also not politically correct to talk about it in the United States because we like to talk so much about diversity and, freedom of religion, which of course we support that. But we don't want to make it seem like Christianity is better than another religion. So to point out that another religion or sort of sect is persecuting Christians, definitely more than they're persecuting them back. I think when I read these news stories, like of the different cases where, like, Nigeria mentioned, like, there's a church that's bombed and they kill a bunch of people in the church. Yeah. I think there's sort of a Western narrative that, well, they're just fighting each other. These groups are just persecuting each other. Right. Tit for tat. It's horrible. It's sad. But it's not like one group is more of the victim and one group is more of the villain.
Right. That's exactly right. It is not politically correct to say that. But the truth is, it is Islamic countries, by and large, that are persecuting Christians. in these 76 countries. It's not only Islam. There are also Hindu attacks, and obviously North Korea is atheistic, but by and large, the majority of these countries are Islamic countries.
So back to Armenia then.
Yes.
Because that is the case in Armenia. No, it's surrounded by Islamic countries.
Yes, and they will not say it's not Islamic in the sense of the way that persecution is happening in other countries, especially Azerbaijan, who's the aggressor of what's happening now in this territory called the Nagorno-Karabakh, Artsakh. There's 100. It's not part of Armenia proper. It's this enclave of 120,000 ethnically Armenian Christians. So Azerbaijan has been painting itself as a secular country and doing a lot of PR work as a secular country. Look, we're a secular country. But the truth is, it is an Islamic country. They are ethnically Turkish. They describe themselves, the Turks and the Azeris, as, really two countries in one, even though they're two separate countries, two countries, one nation. And Armenia is the one thing geographically that is not just Christian, but it's also geographically getting in the way of creating a perfectly seamless pan-Turkic region, right? So if you're ethnically Turkish on one side and ethnically Turkish Azerbaijan on the other, and then there's this group of 3 million Armenian Christians smack dab in the middle, you're going to want that land and that territory. And that's what's happening, and that's what they want.
So this region of Armenia that is right now effectively under siege, is it a piece that the Turks are trying to take?
So it's the Turks helping the Azeris.
Okay.
It's the Azeris that they do want. So they're right now, since December of 2022, it's now an 8-month blockade. They have blockaded the Lachin corridor, which is the only route that connects the Nagorno-Karabakh with Armenia proper. By blockading that corridor, they are effectively religiously and ethnically cleansing that region through starvation.
So when you say block a corridor, again, making this very broken down.
Blocking that road.
You just can't go, you can't leave, you can't get in.
You can't leave, you can't get in. They won't let the Red Cross in. They won't let the Japanese ambassador try to send food. There are other places. They're not letting supplies in or letting people out. They're people who are trying to get out to go to hospitals in Armenia proper. They're kidnapping them.
Wow.
They're shooting at Armenia proper. They are shooting at farmers who, when you're trying to grow food and you're starving and you're being shot at, effectively you're killing off the food supply. Plus there's no fuel. So you can't even transport the food even if you have it. So it's the international community is now calling it a genocide because that's what's happening right now. And most recently, they are allowing those college students who are going to start school to leave. But once you leave, you can't come back. And the only reason they're letting them leave is because they have Russian passports and they're allies with Russia. So you have to let them out. It also looks good on the outside because you're letting people see, look, there's this perception that, see, people can come and go, but that's not the true story.
So, and then the children and the families are not able to get any food, right? That's part
or medical supplies.
So what do you hear, and how do you hear about reports on the ground, and what are you hearing about reports on the ground of how people are doing?
They're not doing well. We heard of that 40-year-old very recently that literally was skin and bones. One of the saddest stories I heard was the single mom who lost both her children to starvation. People are hungry. They're literally being starved to death.
It's just devastating.
It is devastating.
What can be done?
Well, there's so many things that can be done. Politically, I would say putting pressure on the Biden administration to cut all aid, our millions of American dollars that are going to Azerbaijan. There's Section 907 of the Freedom Support Act that states you cannot use this money for aggression against Armenians. So that's a big political push. But the call to action is end the blockade. End the blockade now. We need to airdrop food. We need to get food through. We need to get medical supplies in. Kids aren't going to be going to school this year because how can they go to school? They're hungry. They're traumatized from living under a blockade for 8 months. The weather conditions, there's no fuel. Electricity they also cut electricity at some point. So what are we supposed to do? I mean, if we keep sending money and supporting Azerbaijan, what's the incentive there for them to end this blockade?
So we are literally sending millions of dollars to Azerbaijan to is that foreign aid money, or what is that money used for? What is the premise for that?
Well, it's not supposed to be, I don't exactly know what it's used for, but it's not supposed to be used to start a war with Armenia.
Of course.
Yeah.
And then this country is being the aggressor in this conflict and shutting off food, shutting off fuel, like you're saying. So I think that sounds like a no-brainer.
It does.
I know the complications of these things are, I'm not a foreign policy expert, but what are the excuses? Like, why haven't more people heard about this? What are the excuses for Azerbaijan?
Well, I don't know that they can make excuses because it's very clear to anyone who's paying attention at all that what they're really trying to do is either you can leave and never come back.
But you can't. There's blockades, no?
Well, I mean, if they're letting these people with Russian passports,
Okay.
like the students, okay, you can leave. Or you can give up and surrender to Azeri control, which Armenians won't do. Or you starve to death, and then the land is essentially yours. I'm not a foreign policy expert either, and I don't know. I mean, I keep hearing reports of different international communities having all these conversations, and but then what is it actually going to take to broker a so-called peace deal? And peace for how long and under what conditions? Because the truth is, Azerbaijan and Turkey have made it very clear that they will finish what their fathers started, meaning the genocide of the 20th century. They're going to finish what their fathers started. That is their goal. And there's a phrase in Turkish called leftovers of the sword. Armenians are any Armenian that's alive today is a leftover of the sword. So these are countries that fail to recognize the Armenian genocide and call Armenians leftovers of the sword, and we're going to finish what our fathers started. And when Pope Francis spoke out against the Armenian genocide, the president of Turkey said, I criticize and I condemn him for speaking out.
Condemn the Pope.
Condemn the Pope. He should, and I warn him.
So is this a well-known fact in Azerbaijan that we hate the Armenians and we want to destroy them? Is that like a common identity in a way, national identity, or is that more the political leadership who wants the land?
Well, if there's a phrase leftovers of the sword in Turkey, and probably Azerbaijan, I think culturally, yes, Armenia is disliked. Does that mean that every Turk, that every Azeri feels that way?
Right.
No. But, this is a story that it's hard to tell, but when Egypt went to war with Israel, my grandmother, the man that she bought groceries from for 30 years, that his kids played with my mom, the day that Egypt went to war with Israel, he told my grandmother, first we'll get them, meaning the Jews, and then we'll go after you.
How does that, it's such a striking thing. Again, we're so privileged in the United States to not have to deal with genocide on a daily basis. We are so protected from that at large. I'm not saying people don't experience horrible things, because obviously horrible things happen everywhere. But that idea of your neighbor literally says, I'm going to come and kill you. And there's no legal relief or reprieve. This is just, he wants to kill you, but he did business with you for years. And the kids played together. And I know there were stories of this in Nazi Germany, Jewish families who would hang out with non-Jewish families and the kids would play together. And then once the persecution started amping up and the rhetoric started amping up, then it was like, we're not even going to have the kids play together. They are the other.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to me how quickly that can happen.
Yeah.
That hatred can take root, and that bias and racism and religious persecution can spring out of that hatred.
Absolutely. I think it's extremely difficult for Americans to believe because it's so far from American thought. I truly believe that. It's very hard. The fundamental mistrust that exists among people who are different than you is not, to America's credit, part of our DNA, I think. In the sense of like, not that we don't have our issues here, our race issues, our conflicts, our, especially being a melting pot. It's not that didn't exist, but I'm talking about today in my experience as an American.
Well, I think there's a lot of proactive work that has been done in this country. And I do think, there's a lot, especially amongst kind of conservative sort of media, there's a criticism of, oh, you're too sensitive about racism. This isn't racism. Why are you calling something racist? That's not racist. Or everyone's a racist to you. But that hypersensitivity is a response in a sense to what can go wrong.
Yeah.
And, that is where I don't think we're born looking with each other with distrust. I don't think distrust is a natural state.
Yeah.
But it's an easy state to fall into because of our woundedness.
Yes.
And I do think that it can be easy to hate. I mean, hatred can, because of woundedness, be easy to practice. And so what is the solution? What do you think is the solution? We get food there, let's say, we stop the blockade, but how do we change the dynamics of whole countries to prevent that genocide from being completed? Yeah,
so let's say the blockade ends today, we get food in there. To have the reality, like the reality check that the Azeris and Turks will not stop. What Armenia needs is friends. And she doesn't really have friends. And the reason she doesn't really have friends is because she's not economically prosperous to anybody. Mm-hmm. So we don't know about this issue in the media because it doesn't really matter economically, politically for us.
So sad.
It's the truth. So how do we get virtuous men in leadership that care about a country, a small Christian country? That I think one way is for the good people of America to remember that there was a time when we really did play a hand in history in keeping these people alive, a beautiful one. And the second thing is to think that it will come back to bite us because Armenia represents democratic, anti-authoritarian Western values in a region that largely doesn't. So even if you don't care about the fact that they're humans suffering in a terrible way, or you don't care about that they're Christians, or any of that, care about the fact that you want to support Western values in a place that really needs that support because you might need it. You might need it one day, if anything.
It makes sense to me. I mean, look at all the aid we provide to Israel as an example, because they're kind of that, from like the geopolitical standpoint, they're that bastion of, you could say, Western values or Western alliance in the middle of what can be an often hostile territory.
Right.
But, people would say, well, Israel has more firepower, literally, than I think their nuclear power, right? So, Armenia doesn't have, I would imagine, a strong military. Imagine being a country where 1.2 million of your people were wiped out. I'm sure that recovery from that is not, how does one recover?
Yes, and especially the 2020 war, which the Azeris, again, were aggressive against the Armenians in a time where people were distracted with COVID and quarantine, and we got wrapped up in the Ukraine issue. So it was the perfect time. It was clever. It was the perfect time to attack Armenia. There's not one Armenian, I would say, that doesn't have a genocide story. And now in Armenia, there's not one Armenian that hasn't lost a husband, a son, a brother to the war. I mean, it feels extremely hopeless.
What does that feel like for you as an Armenian and the community that you come from? What does that trauma look like in sort of the day-to-day in a community, especially when it's part of the diaspora, you've come to the United States now, but to know that in your family line, there are victims of genocide, and really every family has been affected?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's the question of like, there's like, on the one sense, gratitude that Egypt was a place to go to, but then we had to leave Egypt because of increasing levels of Islamic fundamentalism there, right? The things that happened with ISIS in the last decade were things that, my family wanted to avoid. right? Knowing that the situation in Egypt was going less from a very liberal, open democracy where you had Italians, Greeks, Jews, and Armenians to becoming more and more fundamentalist. So taking a preemptive strike and leaving the country, which turned out to be good for us. But in what does that trauma look like? Is there ever going to be maybe not in this life, right? But is there a place, and feeling very passionate about keeping America free? When we were little, when we talked politics, there was always that, my mom and dad being like, kind of like that knee-jerk reaction of like, close the windows because we're talking about politics, or because in Egypt you want to be careful what you say out loud. So here in the United States, when we're having these free speech issues, like we really need to be careful because we don't want to go down to like censoring anytime if we're never allowed to say anything because someone might be offended, we're like, it's a slippery slope of getting to a place like these countries where you can't really be free. So I think we're very, very sensitive to that here because wait a minute, we just got here. Like I'm the firstborn here.
Wow.
We just got here. I don't want to start seeing things happening here that were happening in the last two places, So that's one element of it. But to always know that like man's freedom, religious freedom, being the most fundamental, assuming life, right? Religious freedom is the most fundamental freedom that man has, and it's worth protecting even if it's not economically prosperous for you.
I think the sort of counter argument from people in the political space is that, well, we're not the big brother for the world.
Yeah.
The United States can't get involved in everybody else's conflicts, even if it would be just in terms of we would be siding with a true victim against an aggressor. Do you have any opinions on that?
Yeah, I mean, I do. One of them is, Armenians are not a place where you're going to force democracy. They already
it's a different thing.
They already believe in democracy.
Right? Interesting.
We're not trying to force American Western values on a people that can't relate to it on any existential level. These people are already democratic, anti-authoritarian, Christian, and free. They need support. They need the right to self-determination, and they need Western support for that. So it's very different.
A welcome banner for the Americans versus
because I can see why America's like, what, every time we get involved, things are not, we don't do foreign policy right. Every time we get involved, we kind of mess up something. We mess it up, especially for Christians, right? But this is a different thing, and it feels like crying wolf, but it's not. Armenians don't need us to go in there. We don't need troops. We don't need money. We don't need that. What we need is support against aggressors.
And as you said earlier, that support doesn't necessarily even look like going to arms against the aggressor. It's, withholding the millions of dollars.
Exactly.
There's a lot of different forms of diplomacy, different levels of engagement that you can use or you can enter. And the reality is we're not, sounds like, doing anything. Are we doing anything right now as the United States in this conflict?
Trying to supposedly broker a peace deal, but
we're saying that.
Yeah,
have we said that as a country?
The Biden administration has withheld the waiver for Section 907, but it really has to continue to withhold it until stop the shootings, the weekly shootings, knock it off, and Armenians won't shoot back because they do not want war. We do not want war again. So it was very unfortunate that Stalin gave that territory under Azeri jurisdiction. After World War I, we had these couple years of independence, and then Armenia was under the Soviet Union. And then it declared its independence in the 90s. And then Artsakh, Nagorno-Karabakh did as well. So Azerbaijan and Turkey have been kind of planning this moment for a long time and have been doing an excellent PR job trying to paint themselves as secular people, and it's great. I mean, they have, they've been doing a really great job on that, and I wish Armenians would, kind of catch up. It feels too late.
Well, if they're starving, it's a little hard.
Well, yeah, now it's very hard. Yeah.
So what are some practical things that you want other people to do? Like folks listening right now, what are some things that they can do? I mean, certainly let's pray. for the people of Armenia, especially the ones in the corridor who are being
Yes.
persecuted, and for their safety. I mean, that they can be freed from this. What can people do?
I think people feel, oh, I'm not an influencer. My voice is too small. Know the story. Know the story. You don't have to know every detail. It's complicated, but know your story, your American history in this way, that we did this before, we can do it again. And also hashtag Save Armenia in your social media. The more people talk about it, the better. And the more you call your congressman, your representative, and just put pressure, on them to, like, hey, this is one of the and this is, again, idealistic, but nothing great was ever achieved without great high ideals. But Robert Nicholson, the president of the Fearless Project, who's been working on this Armenian initiative, this issue, why isn't this issue in the presidential debates? It should be. It should be. Now, again, that seems like it could be crazy talk, because why should we care? It doesn't matter to us. It doesn't change our everyday life. But again, if we want to continue to perpetuate true Western values here in this country, we need to intelligently support it in other places where they desperately, desperately need it.
Well, thank you for being a voice, Simone. You've educated me. I know you're educating so many other people who just don't understand. And I think that movement's going to keep growing. And so how can people find and follow your work?
Thank you so much, Lila. Thank you for this platform and this opportunity to retell the American Armenian story. Go to philosproject.org/Armenia. You can sign up for newsletter updates, which I'm really excited to share with anybody signing up. For those who are Christian, who are interested in the Christian story, again, First Christian Nation, there's a lot of spiritual richness in the Armenian tradition that I look forward to sharing, as well as practical ways that you can help.
Thank you, Simone. We'll be praying and looking forward to seeing, I hope, good things happen soon as more people become aware and we can take action as a country.
Thank you, Lila. Thank you, my friend.